Rightfully so. The focus in this Congress is very much about the economy and job creation. And it's appropriate that we have before the Senate a piece of legislation dealing with small business. And we know that small business and entrepreneurship is a path to job creation. And we're spending a lot of time in this Senate, in the House, in Washington, D.C., discussing the economy. And one of the things that's front and center today is the need for us to be much more responsible in our spending habits. In my view, the federal government is financially broke. Rightfully so, we ought to pass a continuing resolution that reduces spending for the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year. We ought to quickly move to a budget and to an appropriation process that allows for the give and take, the consideration of those things in which we can afford to spend money on, the things that are appropriately the role of the federal government, and find those places in which we can again significantly reduce spending. And that's an important aspect of whether or not we're going to get our economy back on track and jobs created. And I think often we write off what happens in Washington, D.C. The American people see us as just Republicans and Democrats having one more battle about spending and deficits. It's things that I've heard, topics that I've heard discussed my entire life coming from Washington, D.C. The reality is this is an important issue at an important time in our country's history. And in the absence of the appropriate resolution of this spending issue, in my view, the standard of living that Americans enjoy today will be reduced. Inflation will return. The value of the dollar will be diminished. The standard of living that we have come accustomed to as Americans today, as I say, will be diminished. But even worse than that, the opportunity for our children and grandchildren to pursue the American dream is certainly less than what we want it to be, certainly less than what I experienced as an American growing up in this country. And yes, it's no fun for us as elected officials to talk about things that need to be cut, spending that needs to be reduced. And I certainly stand willing to work with my colleagues here and with the President and others to see that we accomplish that goal of reducing spending, and the consequence of that being a better budget picture and a reduced deficit. But there's a positive aspect of what we can do to reduce our budget deficit that goes beyond just cutting spending. And that is to create jobs, to create economic expansion. The optimism that this country needs can be restored by decisions we make here in the United States Congress. And those decisions revolve around a business or an entrepreneur, a small businessman or woman's decision that it's time to expand their plant. It's time to invest and put in more plant and equipment, that it's time to hire an additional employee. But in my view, one of the reasons that that's not happening is the tax environment that's been created, the uncertainty that we have with what our tax code is going to be, the lack of access to credit, the uncertainty that our bankers and other financial lenders face in determining whether or not they can make a loan to a credit-worthy customer. And especially, the one I want to talk about just briefly today, is the regulatory environment that the business community finds itself in. And this effort by the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gases, in my view, does two very negative things toward job creation. One is it increases the cost of being in business. And that occurs at a time in which we don't expect other countries to abide by the same regimen that we may create, that our Environmental Protection Agency may create around the world. That we would not expect other countries to abide by those same rules and regulations that the EPA is putting in place. That means, once again, American workers, American business is at a competitive disadvantage in comparison to those who make decisions about where plants are located. And we lose access to world markets because somebody else can sell something cheaper than we can because of rising costs of production. And so, even if there is an effort that excludes agriculture or small business from this legislation, the cost of production goes up because, in addition to the direct effect of having those regulations applied to your business, there's the indirect increase in cost related to fuel and energy costs, electricity and gas. And so, clearly to me, if you care about job creation, you would make certain that the Environmental Protection Agency does not head down the path that it's going because of the increased cost of being in business and the consequences that has for American business to be able to compete in a global economy. The second aspect of that is, and I think it's one of the real drags on today's recovery from the recession, is the uncertainty. No business person feels comfortable today in making a decision to expand or to put more people to work, to hire an additional employee, to invest in plant or equipment because they don't know what the next set of regulations are going to do to their bottom line. And so even the uncertainty of this issue, we've had the drag upon our economy of the thought that Congress might pass the legislation labeled cap and trade. It became clear when the Senate adjourned at the end of 2010 that that was not going to happen. But then the uncertainty became, but what is the Environmental Protection Agency going to do? As I visit plants, facilities across Kansas, and talk to family owners of small businesses, manufacturers, the most common question I get from a business owner is, what next is government going to do that may put me out of business? It's unfortunate. It seems like government is no longer even neutral in regard to the success of a business in the United States, but has become an adversary. And so, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to support the McConnell Amendment. I think it is a clear statement that the Environmental Protection Agency cannot do what it intends to do. It eliminates the uncertainty that a business person faces, and it reduces the cost of being in business in a way that says we're going to grow the economy and put people to work. We're going to have a lot of conversations on the Senate floor. We're going to have discussions with the administration, with our colleagues in the House of Representatives about what spending we are going to cut. And those were difficult conversations. But I come back to the point that we as Americans have the opportunity to be optimistic. And what we need to do for us to have a bright future, what we can do to have a positive conversation with the American people about what good things are yet to come, revolves around the fact that we will get rid of onerous regulations that serve no valid purpose in improving our environment and create great uncertainty and ever-increasing costs for being in business. We can have this conversation in a vacuum, but the reality is our economy doesn't operate in a vacuum. Our business folks in Kansas and across the country have to compete in a global economy. And this legislation that Senator McConnell, Senator Inhofe has offered eliminates that uncertainty, reduces the cost of being in business, and allows us to have optimism about the future of the American economy, and most importantly, optimism for the people who sit around their dining room table wanting to make certain they either can keep a job or can find a job. And so, Mr. President, I see the McConnell Amendment as that moment of optimism, the message we send to the American worker, to those that are employed and to those who are unemployed, that this United States Senate understands that unless we get rid of the impediments toward growing an economy, we have little optimism about the future of job creation. The McConnell Amendment sends that message. It does it in a way that makes a lot of sense for the American economy and for the American worker. I thank the President and yield back my time.